"We're not dating," she announced to her family on Thanksgiving, and I left the next morning when her parents found out they invited me back without her. I thought I knew Rachel well enough after 2 years together, but apparently I'd been wrong about everything. We'd driven up to her family's lakeside cabin in Minnesota together, talking about holiday plans and her grandmother's famous stuffing recipe, and now I was sitting at their dining table feeling like a complete stranger. Her grandmother had just asked us about wedding plans over dessert, that sweet way older people do when they see a couple who seems settled, and I was about to make some light-hearted comment about taking things one day at a time when Rachel's voice cut through the warm family chatter like a knife. "Actually, we're not really dating," she said with a casual laugh that didn't reach her eyes, glancing around the table as if she'd just mentioned the weather. "I mean, we hang out and everything, but it's not like we're serious or anything." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the grandfather clock in the corner ticking, could see her younger cousin's mouth hanging open slightly, could feel the weight of 8 family members staring between Rachel and me with expressions ranging from confusion to outright shock. Her parents exchanged one of those married couple looks that communicate volumes without words, her mother's fork suspended halfway to her mouth while her father's eyebrows drew together in that way that meant he was processing something unpleasant. I sat there for exactly 3 seconds, long enough to register the complete humiliation washing over me, then stood up and carefully placed my napkin beside my plate. "Well," I said, keeping my voice steady and polite, "thank you all for the wonderful meal. Since non-boyfriends don't typically stay for family holidays, I should probably head home." I could see Rachel's face go pale in my peripheral vision, but I didn't look directly at her as I pushed my chair back and headed toward the coat closet. The dining room stayed silent except for someone's sharp intake of breath. Rachel's mother followed me to the front door, her face creased with concern and what looked like genuine confusion. "Tom, please don't leave like this," she said quietly, glancing back toward the dining room where I could hear hushed, urgent voices starting up. "I don't know what's gotten into Rachel, but you're family to us. You don't have to go." I appreciated her kindness more than I could express, but I also knew I couldn't stay in that house another minute. "I really do need to go, Mrs. Patterson," I told her as I pulled on my jacket. "Thank you for everything, truly. You have a wonderful family." The 3-hour drive back to Minneapolis gave me plenty of time to replay every moment of the evening, every subtle sign I might have missed that Rachel was planning to publicly deny our entire relationship. I spent the rest of the night in my workshop, sketching out kitchen cabinet designs for a client's remodel and trying to process what had just happened. The familiar work of measuring angles and planning installations helped quiet the storm in my head, but I couldn't shake the image of her family's shocked faces or the casual cruelty in Rachel's voice when she dismissed 2 years of our life together like it meant nothing at all. I'd met Rachel 18 months earlier at the community college's weekend woodworking program, where I taught basic furniture construction to supplement my contracting income, and she was learning repair techniques for her vintage clothing boutique downtown. She'd approached me after class with questions about refinishing an antique armoire, and I'd been struck by her genuine enthusiasm for craftsmanship and her willingness to get sawdust under her perfectly manicured nails. Our first real conversation lasted 2 hours past class dismissal, covering everything from wood grain patterns to her dreams of expanding the boutique into a full lifestyle brand. I should have recognized the warning signs earlier, but they crept in so gradually that I convinced myself I was imagining things. It started with small changes in her behavior around other people. She stopped reaching for my hand when we walked past her college friends on campus, began introducing me as someone I know at boutique networking events, and developed a habit of arriving separately to any gathering where her professional contacts might be present. When I asked about updating her relationship status on social media, she laughed it off, saying she preferred to keep her personal life private, but I noticed she'd removed the few photos of us that had been posted months earlier. The shift became impossible to ignore during her friend's engagement party 3 months ago, when the bride-to-be asked if we'd ever considered taking that step ourselves. Rachel's nervous laughter still echoed in my head. "Oh, we're just having fun," she'd said, avoiding my eyes completely. "Nothing serious, you know how it is." I'd felt the sting of that dismissal but told myself she was just uncomfortable with public attention about our relationship. Looking back, I realized she'd been testing out different versions of our story, gauging reactions to increasingly distant descriptions of what we meant to each other. The weekend trips to antique fairs became solo research expeditions when she talked to other dealers. The dinners I cooked for her became grabbing food with a friend in conversations I overheard. Even our shared interest in restoring vintage furniture got reframed as, "This guy I know who's handy with tools." During the drive up to the cabin, she'd specifically asked me to keep things low-key around her traditional grandparents, claiming they wouldn't understand our modern approach to relationships. I'd assumed she meant they were old-fashioned about couples living together or something similar, not that she planned to pretend we barely knew each other. The most painful part was realizing how carefully she'd orchestrated the whole thing, down to suggesting I drive separately in case one of us wanted to leave early, and her insistence that we book separate rooms at the bed and breakfast for appearances. She'd systematically erased our connection before walking into that dining room, leaving me completely unprepared for the public execution of our relationship over her grandmother's pumpkin pie. I woke up Friday morning to 17 missed calls and my phone buzzing constantly with text messages from various members of Rachel's family, but nothing from Rachel herself until nearly noon when she sent a single message: "We need to talk." Her father called me directly around 10, his voice heavy with confusion and what sounded like genuine disappointment. "Tom, I don't understand what happened last night," he said. "I've been planning to ask you about helping me build that deck edition we discussed, and frankly, I thought you were practically part of the family already." The hurt in his voice was worse than my own embarrassment. Mr. Patterson had spent months including me in family projects, asking my opinion on home improvements, treating me like the son he'd never had. "I'm sorry this happened the way it did," I told him, not sure how to explain something I didn't fully understand myself. Rachel's mother called an hour later, her voice shaky with what might have been tears. "I owe you an apology, Tom. I had no idea Rachel was feeling uncertain about your relationship. I honestly thought you two were practically engaged, the way she talked about you when you weren't around." That revelation hit harder than I expected. "How did she talk about me?" I asked, needing to understand the disconnect between her private and public versions of our relationship. "Like you hung the moon," Mrs. Patterson said quietly. "She'd tell us about your woodworking projects, how you fixed her boutique's shelving, how thoughtful you were about remembering her grandmother's birthday. I'm so confused about what changed." The most surprising contact came from Rachel's sister Emma, who texted me around 2 in the afternoon. "I'm mortified by what happened. Rachel spent the night crying but keeps telling everyone she needed space to figure things out. Grandma keeps asking where that nice contractor boy went and refuses to accept that you're not coming back for leftovers today." I was still processing these conversations when Rachel showed up at my apartment unannounced around 4, still wearing the same clothes from yesterday and looking like she hadn't slept. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and her makeup had that smudged quality that suggested tears and hasty touch-ups. "Can we please talk about this?" she asked, not quite meeting my eyes as she stood in my doorway. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." I let her in but didn't offer coffee or try to make her comfortable the way I normally would. What kind of misunderstanding involves telling your entire family we're not actually dating? She fidgeted with her purse strap, still avoiding direct eye contact. I got overwhelmed with all the wedding talk and family expectations. It was like performance anxiety, you know? Everyone was looking at us like we were supposed to have this whole future mapped out, and I panicked. Her explanation felt rehearsed, like she'd been practicing it during the drive over. "So you decided the best response was to pretend I meant nothing to you?" "That's not what I meant to do," she said, finally looking at me but only briefly. "I just needed them to back off with all the pressure about commitment and marriage. I thought if I downplayed things, they'd stop asking so many questions." The fact that she still couldn't maintain eye contact told me everything I needed to know about how much truth she was actually sharing. 3 days later, Emma reached out asking if we could meet for coffee at the small cafe downtown where Rachel and I had gone on some of our first dates. I almost declined, not wanting to rehash the Thanksgiving disaster, but something in her message suggested this wasn't just about family drama. Emma looked nervous when I arrived, fidgeting with her coffee cup and glancing around like she was worried about being seen. "I need to tell you something," she said without preamble. And I feel terrible that you're finding out this way, but I can't watch Rachel keep lying to everyone. My stomach dropped before she even continued. Rachel's been seeing someone else for the past 4 months. A law student named Marcus from the university. They met when she consulted his firm about expanding the boutique's legal structure. The words hit me like a physical blow, but they also explained so much about Rachel's recent behavior that I felt almost relieved to finally understand. She's been telling our family that you were just temporary, while she focused on growing her business, Emma continued, her voice barely above a whisper. She said you were a nice distraction but not serious relationship material because you didn't have the same educational background or professional ambitions she needed in a long-term partner. That stung worse than the cheating. The idea that she'd been categorizing me as beneath her standards while I'd been planning a future together felt like a betrayal beyond just the other relationship. Emma pulled out her phone and showed me screenshots that made my blood run cold. Dating app profiles from 6 months ago where Rachel listed herself as single and exploring options. Recent photos with a guy I didn't recognize at restaurants I couldn't afford. Text conversations where she referred to me as the contractor I'm seeing casually. The worst part, Emma said, tears starting in her eyes, is that she was planning to break up with you after Thanksgiving anyway. She wanted to use the family dinner as a public exit strategy, making it seem like the relationship just naturally fizzled out instead of admitting she'd been cheating. I sat there processing this information, feeling simultaneously vindicated and completely humiliated. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because what she did to you at dinner was cruel, and our family deserves to know who she really is, Emma said firmly. She's been playing everyone, using you as a safety net in case things didn't work out with Marcus, and I couldn't stand watching you get blindsided like that. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when Emma explained that Rachel had been planning to keep me around as backup, maintaining just enough connection that she could return if her law student relationship failed. She told Marcus's friends that she was casually dating a blue-collar guy, but nothing serious, while telling our family you weren't committed enough for her standards. She's been managing multiple narratives to keep all her options open. I thanked Emma for her honesty, even though it felt like getting punched in the gut by someone trying to help. At least now I understood why Rachel had seemed so detached lately, why she'd been so careful about our public appearances, and why the Thanksgiving announcement had felt so calculated and cruel. 2 weeks later, Mr. Patterson called asking if I'd meet him for lunch at Murphy's Diner, the same place where I'd helped design their custom booth seating the previous spring. I hesitated, not wanting to make things more awkward for Rachel's family, but his voice carried a weight that suggested this was important. When I arrived, both her parents were waiting in our usual corner booth, looking like they had something serious to discuss. "We need to apologize to you," Mrs. Patterson said immediately, her hands wrapped tightly around her coffee cup. "We've done some investigating since Thanksgiving, and we're absolutely mortified by what we've discovered about Rachel's behavior." Mr. Patterson leaned forward, his expression grim. "We found out about Marcus through mutual friends at the country club. Apparently, Rachel's been bringing him around town for months, introducing him as her boyfriend while telling us you weren't serious about commitment." The betrayal in their voices was unmistakable, and I realized they felt as deceived as I did. "She's been lying to everyone," Mrs. Patterson continued, her voice shaking slightly. "To us about you, to you about her intentions, to Marcus about her availability. We raised her better than this, and we're ashamed of how she treated someone we consider family." That word hit me harder than I expected. Family. These people had welcomed me into their lives, included me in their traditions, made me feel like I belonged somewhere, and their daughter had been systematically dismantling all of that behind everyone's backs. "We want you to know that her behavior doesn't reflect how we feel about you," Mr. Patterson said firmly. "You've been more genuine and reliable than our own daughter, and that's not something we take lightly." Then came the invitation that completely floored me. "We'd like you to join us for Christmas dinner," Mrs. Patterson said. "Rachel won't be there since she's apparently spending the holidays with Marcus's family in Chicago. But we'd love to have you if you're comfortable with that." I sat there stunned, processing the idea that Rachel's parents were choosing me over their own daughter for their family celebration. "Are you sure that's appropriate?" I asked. "I don't want to cause more family drama." "Tom," Mr. Patterson said seriously. At this point, we consider you more family than Rachel. She's shown us exactly who she is, and it's not someone we recognize or respect. You, on the other hand, have been nothing but honest and decent, even when our daughter was treating you terribly. Mrs. Patterson nodded emphatically. Rachel's grandmother has been asking about you every day since Thanksgiving. She refuses to accept that you two have broken up and keeps insisting Rachel made a terrible mistake. When we told her about the Christmas invitation, she actually clapped her hands and said it was about time we chose the right person to keep around. The conversation continued for another hour, with them sharing more details about Rachel's deception and their growing disappointment in their daughter's character. By the time we parted ways, I felt like I'd gained something valuable even while losing the relationship I'd thought I wanted. These people saw me clearly, valued me genuinely, and were willing to stand by that even when it meant confronting their own daughter's failures. Christmas Eve at the lakeside cabin felt both surreal and completely natural, like stepping back into a life that should have been mine all along. Rachel's grandmother insisted I sit in my usual spot at the dinner table, the same chair I'd occupied during Thanksgiving before everything went sideways. Her grandfather showed me the detailed plans he'd drawn up for the deck edition we'd discussed, spreading blueprints across the coffee table after dinner like we were business partners planning a major project. I've been thinking about those support beam calculations you mentioned, he said, pointing to his sketches with the enthusiasm of someone half his age. The family treated me exactly as they always had, with an ease that made Rachel's absence feel like a relief rather than a loss. We were halfway through dessert when headlights swept across the front windows, followed by the sound of car doors slamming and voices carrying across the snow. Mrs. Patterson froze with her fork halfway to her mouth, exchanging a quick glance with her husband that clearly communicated they weren't expecting anyone. That sounds like Rachel, Emma said quietly, moving toward the front window to look out. And she's got someone with her. The front door opened without a knock, because of course Rachel still felt entitled to walk into her family's home unannounced. She appeared in the doorway to the dining room looking windswept and slightly frantic, followed by a tall, thin guy in an expensive-looking coat who was clearly trying to project confidence while obviously feeling uncomfortable. "Surprise," Rachel said with forced cheerfulness, though her smile faltered when she saw me sitting at the table. Marcus and I decided to drive up from Chicago after all. His family's gathering was a bit overwhelming, so we thought we'd spend Christmas Eve here instead. The silence in the room was deafening. I could see Rachel processing my presence, her eyes moving from me to her parents to the empty chair that should have been hers but was now occupied by extra place settings her mother had optimistically arranged. "Rachel," her father said coldly, "we weren't expecting you. We made it clear that Tom was our invited guest for Christmas." Marcus shifted uncomfortably beside her, clearly picking up on the tension even if he didn't understand the context. "I'm sorry," he said, extending his hand toward Mr. Patterson. "I'm Marcus Williams." Rachel's mentioned so much about her family, I was excited to finally meet everyone. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that Marcus was being more polite than Rachel, who was still staring at me with a mixture of shock and what looked like indignation. "What is he doing here?" she finally asked, her voice sharp with accusation. "Tom was invited as family," Mrs. Patterson replied firmly, "while you chose to spend Christmas elsewhere. We honored your choice." The argument that followed was swift and brutal, with Rachel accusing her parents of choosing sides and betraying their own daughter, while they calmly explained that they were simply showing loyalty to someone who had earned it through honest behavior rather than manipulation. Marcus looked increasingly uncomfortable as the family dynamics became clear, and I started to feel sorry for him. "You described your family as controlling and difficult," he said quietly to Rachel during a pause in the heated exchange, "but this doesn't seem like what you told me." That comment landed like a bomb, revealing how Rachel had been portraying her loving, supportive family to justify her behavior. The evening ended with Rachel storming out, declaring she'd never forgive them for humiliating her in front of Marcus, while he chose to stay for dessert and coffee, apologizing profusely for the disruption and asking genuine questions about the family business and my contracting work. 6 months later, I'd become such a regular fixture at the Patterson family gatherings that Rachel's grandmother had started setting my place at the table automatically, while Rachel remained essentially estranged after several failed attempts at reconciliation that involved more demands than actual apologies. The deck project with her father had turned into a full partnership, with him referring clients to my contracting business and me helping him design custom furniture pieces for their antique collection. Her grandfather and I had started a weekend woodworking mentorship program at the community center, teaching basic skills to teenagers who reminded me of myself at that age, eager to build something meaningful with their hands. The family dynamic had shifted in ways none of us had anticipated, but everyone seemed to embrace. "Our gatherings are so much more relaxed now," Mrs. Patterson confided one Sunday afternoon as we worked together in her garden. I didn't realize how much tension Rachel brought to everything until she stopped coming. "We can just enjoy each other's company without walking on eggshells." I'd started dating someone new, a fellow contractor named Jessica whom I'd met through Emma's referral at a home renovation expo. Jessica appreciated my work ethic and shared my interest in restoring old houses, and more importantly, she never made me feel like I needed to apologize for who I was or what I did for a living. When I brought her to meet the family, Rachel's grandmother immediately declared her much more suitable than Rachel had ever been, which made everyone laugh except for the awkward moment when we realized what that statement revealed about their true feelings toward their own granddaughter. Through Emma, I learned that Rachel had moved to Chicago permanently and gotten engaged to yet another law student after only 2 months of dating, following the same pattern of rushing into commitment when it served her purposes while avoiding it when genuine connection was required. She's posting all these photos of her ring and talking about how she finally found someone who understands her worth, Emma told me with obvious disgust. "It's like she learned nothing from what happened with you and Marcus." The most unexpected development came when Mr. and Mrs. Patterson asked me to walk Emma down the aisle at her upcoming wedding, since her father had developed heart problems that made the physical demands of the ceremony difficult for him. "You've become like a son to us," Mr. Patterson explained when he made the request, and Emma specifically asked if you'd be willing to take on this role. "She says you're the closest thing to a big brother she's ever had." Standing in their living room, surrounded by photos that now included me in family portraits where Rachel was noticeably absent, I realized that her rejection had led me to something infinitely more valuable than the relationship I'd lost. I'd gained a family who chose me not out of obligation or convenience, but because they genuinely valued the person I was. Rachel had thrown away people who loved her unconditionally because she was constantly looking for something better, something that would enhance her image or advance her status. In the end, she'd lost the people who mattered most while I'd found my place among people who saw my worth clearly and weren't afraid to stand by it, even when it meant disappointing their own blood relative. As I accepted the honor of walking Emma down the aisle, I understood that sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is having someone reveal their true character before you waste any more of your life trying to earn love from someone incapable of giving it.